Hi there, welcome to Quick Connect. I have with me Ethan from Undelusional, and today our conversation is about, well, how do we have conversations with youth and teenagers? So, Ethan, why don't you kick us off?
Okay. Wow. Two arrows straight away. Okay, I'm kidding. Uh, all right. So it's really important that we recognize that there is a differentiation between a normal working adult and a teenager or a youth and the way they manage communication, especially during this time. Um, Again, it goes back to the norm that schooling or being in an environment of schools or being around peers is the norm. Um, uh, as adults, we're very used to dealing with people across different age groups, different hierarchies, different experiences on a day-to-day level. A lot of youth and teenagers don't have that. They deal a lot with peers, they deal a lot with people around the same age or mentors, and there's a very clear difference in the way they interact and experience. But then as adults, we don't have that, right? So a lot of the communication that happens during this time um, becomes a very difficult process for both parents and the teenagers because they always talk about when people hit teenagehood, they become terrible, they become rebellious, they become whatever. And that's a very different way of looking at, they have a very different way of looking at life, which makes it difficult to manage them. So, especially at this period of time, where they can ghost you, meaning they can don't reply. Uh, they can, if you're dealing with teenagers or colleagues that are fresh grads, you have a lot of difficulty trying to get through to them if they want to ghost you, if they don't want to talk to you, right? Because a lot of adults or a lot of working force people would never ghost you. They can't. It's part of their job. Whereas these young people might have a different attitude towards it because they have nothing to lose in this scenario anyway. So recognizing that a lot of them have the choice of disengaging if they choose to not engage is there because they are not as vested in whatever they're experiencing. So that's also a very important part of looking at the mindsets of teenagers and youth. Not, yeah,
When we started off, we were planning on two scenarios, right? One was, well, you are a parent and you have a teenager at home, and then how do you have quality conversations with them? The other scenario was, well, you dealing with an intern who is a teenager, and that in this during this time of working from home, how do you have quality conversations with them? Now, as you were talking, the thing that came to mind was, well, teenagers ghosting someone over communication would be what teachers face quite a bit. So now we have home-based learning, right? So if
yes.
you are a teacher dealing with teenagers, secondary school or above and things like that, then the level of conversation that you have, I think this topic today becomes a lot more relevant for teachers who do home-based learning.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I mean, then the other thing is that because you're interacting with teenagers day in day out, right? Then the question is whether you know them well. But remember that home-based learning changes the dynamics drastically only because also because teachers are usually expected not to directly communicate with students or their parents, even though a lot of parents and students will try to flout the rules. Um, and this round, with the home-based learning, you have no choice but to communicate through all those informal channels, previously informal channels. So it changes the dynamics drastically. It changes the way you communicate altogether differently. And I think when we talk about this, there's a bunch of struggles that will happen, right? And I want to just go into the process of the teenagehood thing because this is like a huge passion of mine, like developmental psychology and understanding how people work, right? So by the way, when we talk about teenagers and youth, in my head, I'm not just thinking of actual age teenage youth or youth. I'm looking at the mentality and mindset. So, but when we talk about this, let's just go into what typically a teenager or youth will experience. We call it individuation. It's a process where you're learning to come and form your own identity for yourself. So in sociology, social psychology, and psychology, they all have different ways of describing this thing, which can be annoying. But what I found is a very good way of lining up all of them is that the individuation process is where you're trying to find where you belong in the world, what you want to choose to do, what you want to choose, not even what you choose, is what you want to choose to do. And then what is it that you need to experiment wide enough for you to have enough exposure to be able to figure out what you want. And so there might be a lot of resistance to advice and impositions or obligations during this era, which is again why a lot of teenagers are rebellious. Not because they want to, it's because they have to do it as a part of the individuation process.
And I was just reading this book. I can't remember what it was. I think it was by Dr. Gary Chapman, and he said that it's very natural for teenagers to be doing the exact opposite of what their parents want. And so, if you like a certain type of music, they will like the opposite or something different, or they're experimenting with something opposite and different, and it's part of the process for them to. I guess your term is individual. To individuate, right? For them to become their own person. And that's the process whereby they will, well, choose something different from you.
Right? No, they might choose similar to you or whatever, but the key part here is so if not, it's a false dichotomy. It's either you accept fully, you have to follow exactly, or you need to go the other opposite end, which is the typical teenager behavior. But here comes the best part, right? After you individuate, you can choose anywhere in the middle also. Or you can be not in the box at all.
Right. Okay, so that's the process by which person then grows up.
Yes. So individuation is a large part of this, but the process of individuation is really tough.
Okay. So how does the understanding that a teenager goes through individuation help with the quality of conversations that we have? How do we make use of that?
One of my favorite stories is parenting story where the dad brings his daughter out to drink when she turns 18 so that, he gets to show her what's it like if she drinks. He makes sure that she gets drunk. And he asks her, okay, how much do you drink until? Okay, 7th glass was where the limit was. Now you're safe. I've created an environment that's safe for you to experiment. Now you know your limit. You know when you want to push the limit and when you don't want to push the limit. Now you know your limit. It's your choice. And that creates the awareness that I created a boundary not by enforcing and imposing upon you, but because I'm educating you. A lot of feedback systems requires an experience.
Right. So you're creating it's like experiential learning for teens.
Yeah, and you cannot take it away from them. One of the key parts here is but remember, this current situation in the world, you can't do much and you can't go and experience new things. I think this is also one of the toughest periods for teenagers as well, if you think about it. So how do you give feedback to them?
Yeah, so that's a topic that we will move on after today's session, right? So now that parents are working at home more, right, because of work from home and due to circuit breaker, how does this affect the quality of conversations that we have with teens? Too much FaceTime and it causes problems and things like that?
So it depends on what culture you're part of, right? And when we talk about this, a lot of cultures that is from the previous era is very imposing. So a lot of people are very used to telling their kids what to do, not how to think about it and how to make decisions. If that's the usual process, what's the conversation going to be like at home? It's just top down, right? It's like going back to army, right? Like you do or you know, but a lot of teenagers will start rebelling. So home abuse has increased all around the world during this period of time. Household abuse and all these kind of things. You can imagine if teenagers stayed at home a lot more, it does cause more conflicts as well. Because especially if the teenager has been, if you imagine that it was a rebellious teenager that went against his parents for the last few months, and then you get a lockdown. What happens?
They set themselves up with they set a context to have a difficult time together.
And so talking about FaceTime, privacy is super important for teenagers. Having their own space is very important. If your teenager still hasn't gone through that phase, it means they're still prepubescent in terms of emotional development. If they need space from you, that's a good process. And then therefore, actually carving out space for them is very important.
So, one of the things that I thought was important when we talk about giving feedback to teenagers, right? It's not about being top down, but it's really about how do we preserve choice and help them to be good decision makers as they grow up, right? Because as a parent, you're never going to be with them all the time, but if you help them to make decisions well, then that will follow them through their lives. So it's a process of how do we both give them the space to make, I hesitate to say experiment because some experiments can be dangerous, but to experiment in a safe environment, like what you said about the drinking, and then help them to make choices. And at the same time, a lot of parents end up in enabling behaviors whereby they protect their children or teenagers from consequences. And I think it's also important to allow teenagers to experience certain consequences as a result of their decisions or behaviors, because that becomes the best feedback mechanism. I think as we talk about feedback, the best feedback mechanism for them to learn and to grow and to develop.
This is where it goes back to this, right? The best feedback is consequence. I think this is something that I love about therapy. You're supposed to let the person burn, or because it's their choice. You only see them 1 hour a week, or this period of time. If they go through anything, you cannot take that burden upon you because you don't have direct control over the person's life. And that's a very important approach to remember to have. It's the same as a parent. It's the same as a boss. It's the same as a mentor or a teacher. You are not in charge of the choice of your child or the teenager or the youth.
Or your employees or your staff.
Yes. It is not within your control. And I know a lot of people believe that they can control other people. It does not exist. Everybody will have their other side if they're being controlled too much. Every single leader I've seen who control their staff either ends up with high turnovers or their staff doing funny things behind their backs. Every leader I've seen who does that. Or eventually leave, basically, it's just turnover. But here comes the most important part for me. When you allow them to make choices, they become better leaders. They become better, wiser people. And when we talk about the consequence concept, right? What is interesting is that there's a Chinese saying called 变本加厉, right? So what happens is that if a kid was to do badly in school, the grades are already enough to demoralize him, and then you still go and cane him. That is called 变本加厉, which is where you take the original and add extra profits on top of it. Okay, add extra things on top of it, right? So this is actually one of the main reasons why teenagers might be even more rebellious than they want to be. Because they're already taking one consequence, you're adding more extra consequence that is not needed on top of it.
So it's like double jeopardy, right? You get
double jeopardy.
You pay for it twice.
And if you're talking about why kids nowadays freeze, or a lot of teenagers freeze in making a choice, it's because of the concept of negative marking. If I make a choice and I make a good choice, I get positive effects. But if I get a wrong choice, it's not negative only, it's double negative. So a lot of teenagers would create their own way of reacting that would be like, I don't want to engage with this whatsoever. They will either shut down or they will ghost. That's also one of the reasons why they need space. So I love the westernized process where you have to move out of the house, you have to live on your own, you have to figure out. I learned the most when I decided not to stay at home.
So I guess as we start to talk about this, then it's important to recognize that when we talk to teenagers, you need to recognize they have this process whereby they're becoming their own individuals. There's this whole double whammy effect that they get both from parent and society. So it's important to then lean more towards the positive slant when we communicating and giving feedback, right? Because the impact of the negative feedback is actually double that of positive feedback.
Emojis are very useful at this time, and casual terms are very useful for them at this time. So being able to relate to them is very important at this time.
Right. So as we do that, we're going to talk on the next topic, which is about feedback, and we can go a little bit more about feedback. So today, that's really what we like to cover about conversations with teenagers. And so we'll see you at the next video.
Bye.
Bye.